So both Abhyas mains and Abhyas prelims are very highly recommended by me to anyone trying to get a simulation as to what I'll have to face. At least up until the point that you know you've done all you can. If they change the pattern, that's not in your hands. Don't be worried about that. Just do as much as you can. It was a long journey of trial and error. Learning what to do, what not to do, it's an ongoing process. So I don't think anyone should be afraid if they end up committing some mistakes. In that moment, you have to compose yourself. You have to think that all that preparation I've done for so long, I can't let it go to waste. So I have to give it my best shot, regardless of whatever the format is.
Hello viewers, today we have one of the brightest stars of UPSC 2023 this year. He hails from the city of Delhi, completed his initial education from DPS RK Puram and then graduated from Hindu College in History Honours. Today we have Anant with us. This year he has scored 146 rank in his second attempt. Hello Anant.
Hi sir.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
How are you feeling? Finally your name in the list.
I'm feeling very happy, very stress-free, ecstatic, I would say.
So from an aspirant to an officer now, what has changed in your life?
I would say people have really started showing me a lot of respect. My parents have started treating me like an adult for once. And apart from that, it just feels nice. It's been my target for a long time, so achieving it feels very nice.
From long time? You're preparing since when?
So ever since I chose to take humanities in class 11th, since then I had decided in the back of my mind that I am going to give the civil services exam. So ever since then I knew, but I wasn't actively preparing. I started properly preparing towards the end of my law degree, which was last year.
So what inspired you for this long journey to get in?
So my father is also in the services. He was a DANEPS officer, got promoted to an IPS, and he is the inspiration behind my decision to take up this job, which I also took up IPS as my first preference. So I would credit it to him.
Okay, very good. Indeed, we don't see students who take IPS as the first option these days. So Anant, tell us about your strategy. Because you're preparing since long. So you might have prepared certain strategy that this is how I'm going to target the exam. Would you like to illustrate on that?
Yes, sir. So basically, during my initial years when I knew I had to give this exam, I just tried to cultivate a mindset which involved staying abreast of current affairs, reading the newspaper, making it a habit. Not because I needed it for academic reasons, just making it a habit because that makes me a better informed citizen. And then after that, when I actively started preparing, I started to look at the approaches of some of the toppers. But to be honest, it is very rare to find anyone who has chosen IPS as their first preference. So it was a bit of a pioneering journey for me. But otherwise, for GS and everything, I really took the guidance. I attended some seminars which some coachings organized to try to get an outlook on how to start preparing actively. And to be honest, it was a long journey of trial and error. Learning what to do, what not to do, it's an ongoing process. So I don't think anyone should be afraid if they end up committing some mistakes during the initial years when they begin their prep, because that is part of the process. You only learn if you try. So you have to commit some mistakes before you streamline your preparation.
So Anant, you talked about covering newspapers initially. Students generally have this question in their mind that is it necessary to read newspaper first? And what amount of time they should devote towards reading newspaper?
So reading the newspaper is an essential part of that process, and if possible, everyone should read any aspirant, should read two newspapers. I chose to read the Indian Express and some important articles from the Hindu. And apart from that, current affair magazines during my active years of preparation, not during the passive years. The initial years when I was not giving hours as such to my preparation were my passive years. And later on, when I started giving 7-8 hours a day, I would call that active years.
Students have this question also in their mind that whether they should go for making notes out of the newspapers. So, did you prepare any notes out of the newspaper?
I absolutely did. I believe, especially during the active years of preparation, when you're giving hours to the preparation, you should at least take out 1 hour where you make notes out of the newspaper. And for current affairs issues, you should always use some format which is editable, which you don't need to scratch out or remove later on. So that is why I suggest using some online tool. I used to use OneNote, and I found it very convenient for me to organize my current affairs notes. So yes, by using OneNote, I made current affairs notes from the newspapers.
Okay. So coming to the D-Day, the day when prelims paper was there, you were sitting in the hall and the papers were getting distributed. When you opened the paper, it was a shock because the pattern has changed this year. So what was the feeling when you saw that paper first?
So initially, when I opened the paper and I saw the first question in the different pattern of choosing the number of statements that are correct, which basically eliminated the elimination method. So it was a shock, I won't lie. So I took 5-10 minutes to go through the whole paper and see if that is how the whole paper has been structured. And to my surprise, yes, the whole paper had questions in that format only. The thing was, in that moment, you have to compose yourself. You have to think that all that preparation I've done for so long, I can't let it go to waste. So I have to give it my best shot, regardless of whatever the format is. So if your groundwork is sound, if you've actually done some hard work to prepare for it, then I don't think, obviously, you feel like you've stumbled a bit in that moment, but you should compose yourself. You should go for it. You should trust your knowledge and attempt as many questions as possible.
Okay, okay. So once you had the first shock, you go in the afternoon and sit for the paper 2, and you get a second shock. This time CSAT was very hard. Many of the students were not able to qualify it. So did you strategize CSAT beforehand? What was your strategy related to CSAT?
So I believe last year only CSAT had gotten a bit tougher, and last year I had a bit of problem trying to get past it, although I did. But that had alerted me to the fact that you need to practice CSAT as well. You can't take it for granted. Because I was attempting PYQs along with some of my peers who were preparing, and PYQs seemed so simple to all of us. But the paper last year and this year turned out to be completely different from the PYQs. So in that context, I chose to watch a lot of YouTube videos on a lot of the topics that come in logical reasoning and mathematics, to try to get an idea of the tips and tricks that you have, the shortcuts that you have to solve these questions in limited amount of time. Because in the CSAT paper, a lot of people actually forget that time management is as important. You can't leave it to chance. You have to be very critical. You have to be very focused on the time also. So basically that, watching a lot of YouTube videos on arithmetic. English, I also practiced a bit. People should not ignore English. I believe people really take it for granted.
English means reading comprehension.
Yes, I'm sorry. Reading comprehension. The English portion of it, reading comprehension, is as important, because people believe people take it for granted and believe they will solve it. But it is actually pretty tough, and you should have some sort of practice beforehand, so you get those 27, 28 questions in the bag easily. It's a low hanging fruit, and I suggest people should really focus on it.
Okay, Anand. So 2024 is just on the call, and there is a change in pattern. So what will you advise to the new students, that what should they do regarding the last few days of the preparation?
So in GS, I would suggest now people should shift to PYQs. Especially in the last few weeks, you should stop attempting new mock tests and rather shift to the PYQs, so that you get a feel for the pattern in which UPSC asks questions. And in CSAT, I would suggest that you obviously try to, the videos that I'm suggesting, these are not very long, so you try to fit some of these into your schedule, and always go one step beyond what you expect in terms of difficulty, because as we've seen, the difficulty has continuously increased, and if you try to go on that same level of difficulty, there's no guarantee that next year the difficulty won't increase. So try to go one step beyond in terms of CSAT, because a lot of my friends did not qualify this year in this attempt because of CSAT, while they had really high marks in GS. So please don't make that mistake. That is my request to them. Don't take it for granted.
Coming to the prelim strategy, students generally tend to give lot of mocks. In fact, they get into a zone where they only give mocks. They don't revise the subject. So how to balance these two things? What will you advise students on this? Second is, you talked about PYQs. Yes, PYQs are important, but generally students go solve PYQs and sit in the exam. How to analyze PYQs?
The main factor while attempting PYQs is that you should never treat it as a vindication that you prepared well enough. It is only to understand the paper, it is only to get a feel of how questions are asked. So attempting PYQs is not a suggestion to try to build up your confidence or believe it to be any rating of your competency. PYQs is just to get an idea of it. As per mocks, I would say towards the end people should reduce mocks. In this peak period, 1 or 2 months before the prelims, please attempt as many sectionals and full length tests as possible. But towards the last 1.5 months, when I believe the paper has been set, so you should stop newspaper coverage also. You should just revise on your notes. And you should keep doing that and keep looking at PYQs just to understand the pattern, so that when you enter the exam hall, there is no doubt in your mind as to what is going to happen. You know, at least up until the point that you know you've done all you can. If they change the pattern, that's not in your hands. Don't be worried about that. Just do as much as you can.
So there are certain high yielding areas in prelims paper which we don't find in mains, like science and technology, maybe art and culture, and ancient and medieval history. So did you strategize those high yielding areas also, and environment also? So did you strategize those areas?
So my focus areas for GS were polity, history, and current affairs in general, which I believe includes science and tech and environment, because there is no static portion for them as such. It is mostly based on current affairs, especially science and tech. Environment, you still have some material available, but current science and tech is in the paper, at least it's mostly from current affairs. So what I did was focus on science and tech in the newspapers. Anytime I used to find anything related to any scientific or technological development, especially which has applications in terms of normal civil life and improving the quality of life, you really need to focus on them, really need to do them properly. And apart from that, polity, I believe Lakshmikant is the bread and butter. You go with, you should make notes out of Lakshmikant. Don't go by the book, by just doing the book.
It's very lengthy book.
It is very lengthy, and you need to revise as well. So if you end up making some crisp notes out of that, you'll be able to revise the whole of polity syllabus within a day, even lesser if it's possible. So polity can be really done well through that approach. Science and tech, as I said, current affairs, environment too.
And Anand, one issue with the students face generally is that they are not aware that where to stop in prelims paper. If you attempt too many questions and you are not accurate enough, you land up in a zone that you have attempted so many questions that you will be out of the list, because negative marking will eat away your hard-earned marks. On the other hand, if they don't take risk, then also they are on the losing side. So did you had this dilemma while you were preparing for prelims?
So during my first attempt, of course, I had this dilemma as well. Every aspirant has this: how many questions to attempt finally in GS or even in CSAT now. So the point is, I was giving a lot of mocks, vision mocks, and I was attempting 40, 50, 60 questions thinking, yeah, I'll get them right for sure. But I was not scoring very well. So that made me realize, and I also listened to a lot of toppers, that you have to attempt 70, 80 to give yourself even a chance of making it. If you get scared of negative and if you don't go for that 70, 80 questions, then you're not giving yourself a good enough chance to make it. If you don't attempt these questions, there is very little chance that it will happen. At least take a gamble, take a risk, and try to attempt as many as possible. And I believe 80, 85 is my ideal range. Of course, it varies from people to people. A lot of people attempted 90, 95 and also scored well. But yes, make educated guesses, but go till 70, 80. Do not stop yourself earlier than that, because then you're not giving yourself a good enough chance.
As it is said that luck favors the brave. So you have to take that step towards uncertainty so as to get out of at least the prelims cutoff.
If when you're covering current affairs, when you're reading the newspaper, or any other source for that matter, try to reverse engineer whichever topic you come across, in the sense that if you've done PYQs well enough, then you know how the questions are asked. So if you know the question format, then if you look at a topic, you can mentally frame questions out of it to see if it is relevant or not. And this is a way that you can really narrow down on what you want to note down from the newspaper and what not. Even within topics, you can decide which information is relevant and which information is not. So reverse engineering questions and topics is a very important strategy to try to narrow down what to cover and what to leave out.
And previous year question help in this strategy. They'll just show you the track that this way the examiner is going to think.
Definitely.
Okay, so Anand, we are done with your prelims, and generally students land up into a zone where they go through various keys and they think that hoga ya nahi hoga, and they waste a lot of time, like around 20 days they waste. So did you face the same thing this year and the previous year also?
So previous year I had made this mistake of not starting my preparation. I think you should take a 3, 4 or 5 days break after prelims, but you have to realize that's not your main target. There is a long way to go right now. It's just a stepping stone. So after prelims you take a break, but then after that just resume your prep for mains like the prelims result doesn't matter. Because either way, if you don't qualify this year, the work that you will do in those 15 days that you will waste otherwise, that will come in handy for your next attempt. So I made this mistake in my last attempt in which I could not qualify mains. But then this year, I started my, especially my optional prep 5 days after giving the prelims, and after the result came, obviously it all turned out for the better.
Last year you were not able to clear mains. This year you are able to get into the list itself. So what was the shift in strategy?
So I realized that there are certain areas where I was lacking, especially when I got access to my mark sheet. I realized I was scoring low in my optional, scoring low in ethics, scoring low in certain sectors of other GS papers. So working on my weaknesses in that sense, I really scaled up my preparation for my optional. There is no substitute for it. You have to really work hard for your optional, because that makes the difference between you and other people. You have to score high in your optional, and that is how you get into the list. Apart from that, value addition. I had mainly focused on trying to cover the syllabus last year. This year I focused on value addition. That is adding data from reports. There's a Niti Aayog report of India at 75. I use that. Using toppers copies for any toppers copy that you appreciate, and then you can access more of their obviously submitted works and really take inspiration and help from that. There's no shame in taking help and guidance from toppers.
Indeed, indeed. Toppers copy help you a lot, specifically in main stage.
It did.
So any specific toppers that you followed, any specific key subjects that you went for toppers copy?
Yes, so I think the year before mine, Shruti Sharma ma'am, I should say, she was the topper. I really liked her copies, both of history optional and GS. Uma Harathi was also, ma'am was another person whose topper's copy is available online, I accessed. Apart from that, a friend of mine also qualified, Muskan Dagar. She was ranked 73, I think. She shared her copies with me personally, and that also really helped, especially in ethics.
Okay, so let's talk about ethics. Generally, we say that ethics and essay are low-hanging fruits in UPSC mains, because the amount of effort you put in these two subjects, you're going to gain proportionate amount of marks in the paper. So what were your strategy related to ethics paper, specifically case studies?
So I definitely agree. Essay and ethics are places in GS papers where you can make a difference, where you can rise above the crowd. So in ethics, my basic strategy was looking at toppers copies and value addition mostly. Apart from that, I used the lexicon book, which covers most topics in theory, but you really need to have an idea of how to answer questions by looking at toppers copies, because the theory part can only help you so much in ethics, especially case studies. So learning how to answer these things is mostly a practical experience by attempting questions, by doing mocks, and by looking at toppers' copies. That was my approach.
And what about quotation-based questions? Quotation-based questions are also very challenging in ethics papers. Generally, students feel very difficult to prepare for quotation-based questions. Did you strategize those questions also?
I did. So my approach to quotation-based questions was to firstly figure out the meaning. So obviously you figure out the meaning, you write the meaning in the introduction itself, so the examiner knows that you've understood the quotation. After that, you can make points of 4 or 5 avenues where this quotation you feel is applicable, and it can be from various background. It could be a political situation, it could be social, it could be economic. You have to brainstorm then and there that this quotation works this way in this field. After that, to present the other side, you can also give a critical view of how this quotation sometimes is not applicable as well, and then conclude by giving your own personal take on that particular quotation.
Okay. So essay is also a very important paper in UPSC mains, and generally students feel very difficult to prepare for it because of the philosophical essays that UPSC asked. So how did you strategize philosophical essays?
So in the essay paper, I actually really like writing essays because I've been practicing them practicing as in my father used to make me write them during school, and then as a history optional student, you're forced to write long answers. So anyway, the basic strategy for essays is I used to have a language transformation notebook. So any good quotations, phrases, idioms that I read in the newspaper, Indian Express, in that editor's column on the top right corner, you'll see a quote as mentioned every day. So anything that you like, you can write down in your language transformation notebook so that you have a very good bank of quotations, idioms, and phrases that you can later on integrate into your writing. Apart from that, most people struggle with the question thinking that how will I fill up 10, 12 sides with this single line of philosophical woe. The thing is, you have to firstly brainstorm. Brainstorming is key in essay paper. It decides how well you'll score. Go to the rough work area, write down that quotation, then you start writing points. At least 20 points of discussion you need to write then and there. These 20 points need to be firstly diverse. They need to cover various sectors, as I said. A good framework is to go by the syllabus. So your first point could be related to history, second point could be related to society, third geography. So the syllabus in as such gives us a multidimensional framework in itself. So you generate points in these particular sectors related to any particular quotation. I think last year's paper it was those who wander are not always lost. So I gave historical examples. I gave Magellan's voyage around the world. He was wandering, but he was not lost. He was looking for a particular target. Then you can give social reformers aspects that cover society. When our Raja Ram Mohan Roy campaigned against Sati, he was wandering. Society believed he was lost, but he was not lost. And this way you can generate points in each of these sectors, in politics, economy, internal security. You can create points.
You can link more dimensions
To the syllabus itself. The syllabus itself is a very good thinking point in terms of essay. So you generate 20, 25, 20, not 25, 20 points, and you write one paragraph on that point, elaborate that point. And you firstly you write those points, then you order them to make some sense. You can't just go on writing anything, you need to link them. So you order them in a way that will create sense, and then you go on writing. And also remember to include a critical note as well, always, to show that you can think the other way as well. So you have to also caution the reader that, for example, those who wander are not always lost. You should not wander too much also, because then you will actually get lost.
Then you'll lost.
So you have to give the counter view as well. You have to be very sure about giving a counter view, because that shows how broadly and diversely you're thinking.
So Anant, you talked about history as an optional subject. Yes. Generally, students do not take low scoring subjects. They call it as a low scoring subjects. Why did you choose history as your optional subject?
Actually, in the beginning, I also had the apprehension that people don't get marks in history, because in general, people were scoring low and not qualifying mains. That was believed to be the trend. But I ended up taking it because it's the only subject that genuinely interests me, which I can study at length. And I've also done my graduation in history from Hindu, so that was also a factor. Apart from that, I don't believe now, after the whole process is complete, I don't believe there are any low scoring optionals as such. You have, if you stand out, if you work hard enough, you can score in any optional that you choose. Don't go with a particular mindset that this optional will never get you marks or something.
So generally, students, when they're opting for optional subject, what should they keep in their mind? Because many of the students who will be watching you, they might not have opted for any of the optional subject. They might be thinking that ye optional nahi hai, ye optional nahi hai. So what should be the broad criteria on which they should think regarding the choosing of optional subject?
I believe the most important is familiarizing yourself with the syllabus of that optional, the UPSC syllabus, which is provided in the exam gazette. So before choosing any optional, please go through the syllabus. Do not choose a optional just on hearsay and what your friends are saying. Go and see if the topics in there resonate with you. Secondly, an important factor is whether you can study or whether you can deal with that subject on a daily basis. Because optional is something through your preparation you have to do daily. Even before you end up stopping your mains prep for prelims, you have to do it daily. After prelims, you have to do it daily. No questions about it. Because optional marks are very important, as I've previously mentioned. So that is another factor. Thirdly, never go by this notion that this option or that optional is low scoring and I should not take it. That is not true. If you like it enough, if you do well enough in it, if you practice enough, you will get marks in it. So these are certain broad criteria.
Okay. So you said that you prepared for the history optional in the last attempt also, and this year also you gave attempt with the history optional only. So what was the difference in strategy?
So last year I was obviously new to the whole preparation, so I went with the complacency that history is my graduation subject and I will handle it very easily later on. But that was not true at all. You need to be prepared for it since the beginning. So when you start preparing in the initial time, you have to focus on your optional. Don't think that, oh, this is my graduation subject or I like this subject so I can deal with it later. That was my most major mistake in my first attempt in failing my first mains. So yes, that was. So the difference between my first attempt and my second attempt in terms of history was focusing on the map. So history has a map which is for about 50 marks. And the map is the only question where theoretically you can actually score 50 out of 50. Although it is very tough, but you can at least get 35, 40 even if you do relatively well. And that is a lot of marks considering that you're getting 50%, 60% as highest marks in all papers. Yeah. So map is the most important area to work on in the first history paper. Second history paper, focus on modern India because the questions from world history are becoming very random. Although this year I found second paper to be relatively easier than the first one, and I scored better in that one only. But yeah, people believe that world history will be relatively easier because the syllabus seems to be shorter and seems to be easier, but it's not. The variety of questions that can be asked from world history are too broad to rely on it as a high scorer. So modern India should be the focus in the second paper. Apart from that, presentation is key. See toppers copies. You have to add maps. You have to add, maybe if you're describing certain pottery forms and other things. I saw Shruti ma'am's paper. She had also drawn the types of artifacts and all on the paper. So that kind of presentation is very important in the history paper. And another key is that you cannot write your answers like your GS paper. Do not write short points. You have to elaborate on everything because that's the difference between optional and GS. That is a mistake I made in my last attempt where I wrote short points. Please don't. You have to elaborate. Explain everything because this is supposed to be a test of your subject.
So Anant, history is also there. History is also in the GS paper one. Yes, and this year many of the students are not able to score well in GS paper one. So if you're not aware about the question in history, how should one tackle the question of history in the GS paper one?
even if you're not very comfortable with history, you can still get 3-4 marks from a 10 marker or 5-6 marks from 15 marker by going through a map based approach or by writing about whatever little you know. Do not believe that I do not know this question and I'll leave it blank, because that is not an option. In the end, even that half mark or 1 mark matters. Believe me, I have 7 people on my exact marks in my rank list. So do not leave it empty, first of all. Second, you can go with a map based approach if your content is less. And I do not believe you should go too deep, and if you're not history optional, then you should not go too deep into preparing for history, because there is no bang for buck there. The amount of variety of questions that can be asked is too much for you to go about preparing all of history. So try to look at PYQs and focus on some key areas that questions are repeatedly asked from, and go ahead and prepare that. If and some uncertain question comes, the other aspirant next to you is as clueless as you are. So don't be worried about that. Just do your best.
It's a relative competition.
Exactly. Do your best and you will do well.
Okay. So last question from mains strategy, that how important are mocks in mains? And what was your strategy for this 3-year time format in the real-time examination? Because you have to write good amount of words in the specific 3-year format, and you have to write best answers to that also in that specific time. So how did you prepare yourself for that?
So the importance of mocks, especially for mains, is critical. You really need to get into the habit of writing, first of all. In the beginning, it'll seem like a huge burden for you to complete that paper, let alone complete it in time. Just writing those many words is a huge task. So I suggest in the initial days, when you're having trouble even writing the whole paper, then you divide it into parts. You divide into 2 parts. Do 1.5 hours in the morning, do 1.5 hours in the evening or the next day, so that at least you start writing, and then gradually start increasing that and complete the paper in one go, in one sitting. After that, you have to start timing yourself. So when you time yourself, there's a simple formula that every aspirant follows. It's 7-10. For every 10 marker, you have to do it in 7 minutes. For every 15 marker, you have to do it in 10 minutes. No more, no less. If you start exceeding that time, you conclude your answer then and there, scratch off the remaining part, move on, because the half or 1 mark extra that you'll get by completing that answer won't compensate for the 10 you lose by wasting all that time, by missing out on a question. So stick to that 7-10 wala format. And in between my last attempt and this attempt, I majorly tried to increase the amount of practice I could get for each and every paper. I gave a mock every 3 days. Mocks are very easily available online. You can give them from home, no need to go to the center. I gave each and every mock of mine at home, never went to the center, and I got good results out of it as well. Upload it, it's for your convenience. So you can also save a lot of time through that if you live somewhere far from old Rajendra Nagar or your coaching center. So give mocks from home, but give them for sure every 2-3 days during the later part of your preparation before mains. Otherwise, earlier, every week, I think everyone should write 1 mock, especially essay. Every Sunday, try to write one essay. I'm not saying complete the whole essay paper, 1.5 hours, 1 essay you write, so that you get your ideas flowing, you get some idea whether you're able to cook up all those words, 1,000-1,200 words in a limited time period.
And practice is very important when it comes to writing.
Practice is key in mains, yes.
Regarding mocks, I think real-time simulated mocks are also important. You have to go to the place, you sit there and then you write. Those things also do help. It makes you feel accustomed to the real-time settings. Obviously, we have to balance it up. It cannot be one approach. And I think Abhyas is doing well in this perspective.
Definitely. I've given Abhyas both during last prelims, this prelims. I've given Abhyas mains during last mains, this mains. And I've never found any other coaching or any other simulatory exercise to be more accurate than Abhyas's, in terms of both giving you a feel as to how the conditions will be, what all you'll be required to do before you start the paper. Getting that familiarity really eases anxieties. because then you go to the exam hall with the certainty that this will happen. So both Abhyas mains and Abhyas prelims are very highly recommended by me to anyone trying to get a simulation as to what I'll have to face.
So Anant, once your mains is completed, you get to know that you will be called for interview. So how do you feel at that point of time? And did you strategize your interview preparation also?
So this year I was after giving my mains, I was relatively confident that I should get the interview call, and if I don't, then something has gone wrong. But thankfully I did get the call. Obviously, it was a very good feeling. It was a vindication of all the effort I had put in. So my strategy at that point of time was to first contact some of my seniors and other mentors to see what all I have to do, how I have to prepare, because my case is very different from the usual aspirant because I have chosen IPS as my first preference.
Yes.
There was a bit of pressure from my parents and my friends also to not take IPS as the first preference, but I ended up convincing them all, and in my DAF I put up IPS as my first preference. So the thing is, what I really struggled with was there was a real lack of content related to IPS being your first preference or any other service for that matter apart from IS in any interview guidance program, because no one takes this path. So there are very few interviews that are held even in mock terms in this setting. So I went to the mentors and they told me to prepare keywords related to my DAF. So obviously policing was a keyword. So anyone who's going to try to put IPS as their first preference in the future, I would recommend to them that you just need to focus on policing as a whole. For example, what is the current status? What reforms are needed? And these are not reforms in the air. I'm not talking about procasting judgments bol do ya as such. You have to talk about real reforms on the ground that can be implemented, and you have to basically do that. You have to be able to justify to the board why should you be made an IPS officer. So you really need to ask yourself that question. It was the first time someone asked me why I wanted to be an IPS. I was also blank. I knew why I wanted to be, but I couldn't verbalize it. So you need to brainstorm that. And I believe interview is the only phase where someone who wants to go for some other service, whether it be IRS, IPS, IFS, needs to justify why they want to go to that service, and they need to do something different from the crowd. So yes, and plus I'd be willing to help and guide anyone who needs some help in this regard. If they want to choose IPS as their first preference, please do. We need a good IPS officer as much as ISs.
Yes, exactly. So Anant, the D-day of the interview, you're sitting outside. Yes, what type of thoughts were coming in your mind? Were you stressed at that point of time?
I was very stressed. It was my first interview. While entering UPSC Bhavan, it's okay because you're going through the procedures and all. But then when you go to the waiting area with the other aspirants and document verification is done, so you have nothing to do. You're just sitting there with your thoughts. So you start getting anxious. What I decided to do was to try to talk and interact with the people around me to distract myself from that anxious thought process. And it did help just talking to my fellow aspirants, because you realize they're in the same boat as you, they're as anxious as you are. Even there were people there who were giving an interview for the third or fourth time, yet they were anxious. So it's a feeling that will never go away. Well, if it's an interview where 5 people are judging you for your character, your skills, your competence, so you will feel anxious. That's normal. But try to distract yourself, try to deal with it. And when they finally called me in, so my heart was racing a bit because of anxiety. Then when I went and said good morning, sat down, the board asked me the first question, I answered it. After that, anyone will start feeling normal, because the board also tries to make an attempt to relax you and to try to make you feel calm so that you can answer properly.
So Anand, was there a line of questioning related to your first preference in the real interview itself?
Surprisingly, no. I believe that was the curveball that the board threw at me. I believe they knew that I would come prepared with that particular woe, so they did not ask me a single question from policing.
But you have to prepare if you're putting.
Definitely, you have to. In mocks, you will get asked quite a few questions. Most of my mocks were entirely about that only. That's why I was going there expecting to be asked a lot of questions about policing, but I was asked none. I think that was there.
And I think in the interview strategy, preparing for uncertainty is also the part of preparation, because they'll always throw a ball which you never expect.
Exactly.
Okay, so Anant, hope fortunately you have covered all the stages and now you're in the list. But when you were preparing, was there any plan B in your mind?
So I am someone who requires a firm platform to stand on before I go on any adventure as such. So I decided to complete my law before I gave any solid attempts. Right after my undergraduate degree finished from Hindu, I did not give any attempts then. I decided I will pursue my LLB. I will complete it and then I will give an attempt. So yeah, law was my backup option, and I suggest most people who give this exam should have a backup option, and ideally they should have it before giving the exam, so that after 4 or 5 years of attempts you're not left wondering what now at the age of 30 or 31. That is a tough stage to be in. So try to create a backup beforehand or along with preparation if you can, although it gets very stressful to manage two things together.
But it is always advisable that if you have plan B, then you will be stressless. A sort of stress is reduced in your preparation.
Absolutely.
So coming to the stress, this is a very long journey, and fortunately you didn't saw many failures in this journey, but students do face failures in this journey. What was your stress coping strategies, and what would you advise to the students who are still struggling to clear this exam?
So I believe although sacrifices are necessary to attain anything that you want, those sacrifices should not cross a particular limit. If you're sacrificing your normal life for this exam, it should be up to a limit. You should not make it all about this exam. You should always stay in touch with your friends, go for your family events, go for your sports, do your gym, whatever you want to do, you take out time for that. Because in the end, when you fail, the only thing that you regret is that, oh, मैंने तो ये भी छोड़ दिया, ये भी छोड़ा इसके लिए, ये भी miss out कर दिया.
Exactly.
And that is the regret, and that is what hurts you the most in the end. My suggestion is you try to live your life as normally as possible. While you do have to make certain sacrifices, maybe not go out every weekend, maybe say no to your friends sometimes. You make those sacrifices, but you don't get enveloped in the whole process so much that you're left feeling empty if you don't get your name in that list.
So Anant, many of your fellow aspirants were not able to clear the exam this year. What will be your advice to them?
My advice would be to, firstly, they should acknowledge their strengths and weaknesses. They should look at their mark sheets and see where they've fell short, whether it's prelims or mains or interview, and accordingly work on those weaknesses, because I believe this exam just requires a good amount of hard work but a tiny bit of luck, and you have to stay at it. You can't just give up suddenly, because in the process you're so I believe after a point of time you're so heavily involved in the process that you start enjoying it. And that is the only advice, that be self-aware, be aware of where you're lacking, where you're not. Do not go on self-assumed notions that I'm good at this, I'm bad at that. That mark sheet is telling you where you're good at, where you're not. Listen to it, work on it. Next year you will improve on it, and next year you will make it for sure.
Thank you, Anant, for such an insightful session, and thank you, viewers, for listening to this session patiently. Hope you have learned valuable lessons from the journey of Anant. You can utilize these lessons in your own journey so as to reach the final destination. Thank you.